I had always dreamed of stability of a life where I could stand on my own 2 feet free from the weight of uncertainty. As a child, I would lie in bed staring up at the ceiling, imagining a future where I controlled my own destiny. My ambition wasn't born out of greed or a desire for power. It was simply a deep yearning for security for years. I worked on jobs thought to make incest meet, but nothing ever seemed to stick. My dreams felt like whispers always there, but never. Within reach one evening while scrolling through job listings, something caught my eye. Driver needed for well businessman. It wasn't the ideal role I had envisioned, but it was a job. It was an opportunity to get my foot in the door. And maybe this could be the break I had been waiting for. I wasn't expecting anything extraordinary, but it promised stability, something I could finally rely on, and in a world where everything else felt uncertain, that was enough. To my surprise, I received an invitation for an interview. I could hardly believe it. My heart raced with excitement and nerves. I had no formal driving experience, but I wasn't about to let that stop me. The thought of working for a wealthy businessman like Farid Alaro was thrilling, and the chance to prove myself was too good to pass up. When I arrived at the address, I was taken aback by the sheer opulence of the place. The mansion was huge, towering, columns, intricate details. The kind of place I had only ever seen in movies. The driveway stretched before me, lined with expensive cars that gleamed in the sunlight. My palms began to sweat. I had never been in such a place, and the contrast between my life and this world was overwhelming. The door opened, and there he was, Farid Alak. He was everything I had expected, and more, tall with an air of authority that demanded respect. His features were sharp, his eyes dark and intense. Despite his imposing presence, there was a strange calmness about him, as though he carried the weight of the world, but never showed it. I hesitated for a moment, trying to collect myself before stepping inside. The interview began in a spacious, tastefully decorated room. Farid sat behind a large desk, his posture straight, his gaze unyielding. I could feel the power radiating from him, but there was no arrogance, just an almost quiet authority. He looked at me with a mix of curiosity and assessment. So Farid said, his voice steady, calm, "Tell me about your driving experience." I froze. I had never driven professionally in my life, but I couldn't let that stop me. If I told him the truth, I knew I would lose this opportunity. I took a deep breath and began to speak, crafting a story about driving gigs I had done in the past, long hours on the road. I exaggerated the details, painting myself as an experienced driver with plenty of knowledge. My heart raised with every word I spoke, but I kept my voice steady. I couldn't afford to back down now. Farid listened attentively, his expression unreadable after what felt like an eternity. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. In front of him, interesting. He said, "I think you'll be a good fit." I couldn't believe it. He was offering me the job despite the lies I had told. Maybe it was my desperation. Or maybe there was something about me that he saw, something that made him believe I was worth a chance. Either way, I had done it. The job was mine. As I left the mansion that evening, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and guilt. I'd landed a job with Farid Alfaro, one of the wealthiest men in the city, but I had lied to get it, and I wondered if that would come back to haunt me. Over the next few days, I settled into my new role. My job was simple: drive Kareem wherever he needed to go. The days were long, and I spent most of my time waiting in the car parked in the driveway, or sitting in the car watching the world go by. But I didn't mind. The pay was good, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had some measure of stability. At first, I was intimidated by Farid's wealth and power. The mansion, the cars, the luxury. It was all so foreign to me. But as I spent more time with him, I began to see another side of him. Kareem was calm, almost serene, despite the chaos that seemed to surround him. There was no arrogance in his demeanor, no sense of superiority. He was gracious, kind even, and surprisingly lonely. I noticed how he rarely paid attention to the women who threw themselves at him, and I found that curious. In a world where status and wealth seemed to attract attention, his indifference was almost out of place. One evening, after dropping Freed off at his mansion, I received an unexpected invitation. "Come inside," he said, his voice steady but inviting. I hesitated. What did he want? But something about the way he spoke, something in his tone, made me feel like it wasn't just a casual invitation. I followed him inside, my footsteps echoing in the vast, silent halls. We ascended to his bedroom, and as we entered, the atmosphere seemed to shift. The room was dimly lit in the view. From the windows overlooked the city. The skyline stretched out before us. There was a softness to the space, a contrast to the cold, impersonal exterior of the mansion. Freed sat on the edge of the bed, his gaze focused on me. "You've been honest with me," he said, his voice low and almost intimate, "but I think there's more to you than what you've shown." I didn't know how to respond. I stood there unsure of what to do or say, but something in me stirred. His presence was commanding, yet there was a vulnerability to him that I hadn't expected. Freed's hand reached out, rushing gently against my arm. The touch was light, but I felt it deep in my chest. He spoke then of fear, of the burden of his wealth and how it had corrupted so many people. He spoke of the loneliness that came with power, how the world had tainted everyone around. "Hi, man," he told me, that I remained untouched by that corruption. Something about the way he said it, the way he looked at me, made me feel seen in a way I had never felt before. It was as though for the first time someone truly understood me, and in that moment I felt drawn to him, not just because of his wealth or power, but because of the man he was beneath it. All that night was the beginning of something I couldn't have predicted. The meetings between us grew more frequent, and soon Freed's mansion became our refuge, a place where we shared moments of intimacy and trust. It wasn't just about the physical connection, it was something deeper, something unspoken. We began to open up to each other, sharing parts of ourselves we hadn't shown anyone else. I found myself opening up to him in ways I never had before. I spoke about my dreams, my past, my fears. Freed listened patiently, offering comfort and understanding, and as time passed, I began to realize that he is revealing more of himself to me as well. He spoke of his regrets, his fears, his failed marriage, and the weight of the responsibilities he carried. It was clear that despite his wealth, Freed was lonely. His life wasn't as perfect as I had imagined. One evening, as we sat on the rooftop terrace, surrounded by the city's lights, Freed admitted something that took me by surprise. "I see something in you," he said, his voice soft, "something special, more than I found in anyone else. You remind me of a time before all of this had gestured around us, to the mansion, to the world he had built before I became who I am now." I didn't know what to say. I had never expected to hear those words from someone like him. But something stirred in me, something I couldn't quite define. It was like he had unlocked a part of me, didn't know existed, but as our connection deepened, so did his possessiveness. I began to notice subtle changes in his behavior. He became more jealous, more controlling. It wasn't just about love, it was about ownership. I could feel the weight of his demands, his need for my complete devotion. There were moments when I felt suffocated, trapped by the intensity of his emotions, yet there were also moments when I felt cherished, as if I was the only person who mattered in his world. The conflict within me grew. I was falling for him, but this possessiveness was starting to unsettle me. I didn't know how to navigate this growing attachment, how to balance the love I felt for him with the unease that his demands were creating. Then everything changed. The turning point came one evening when I least expected it. I had just finished driving, Freed home after a long day as usual. He invited me inside, but this time, something felt different. There was a tense awe about him, something I couldn't quite place. We walked through the grand entrance, and I noticed that the usual warmth in his demeanor was absent. Instead, he seemed distant, lost in his thoughts, as if something weighed heavily. On him, we made our way to his bedroom, and for a moment I could sense the change in the atmosphere. Between us, the usual comfort I felt in his presence had been replaced with something colder. More unsettling, Freed sat at the edge of the bed, his eyes fixed on the floor, and there was a strange silence in the room. I asked him what was wrong, but he didn't answer. Immediately, when he finally looked up at me, I saw a flicker of something guilt. Maybe regret, or perhaps fear. It was the first time I saw him so vulnerable in a way that wasn't calculated, they know. He said softly, his voice was strained, almost breaking. I was confused. What do you mean? He stood up, pacing slowly as if trying to organize. His thoughts, my wife, she found out about, as the words hit me like a punch in the gut. I felt my heart sink, the weight of his confession pressing down on me. I had never imagined that his wife would find out. We had been so careful, so secretive. The thought that it had all come crashing down so quickly was a terrifying reality. Freed's expression twisted with frustration, anger, and a sense of helplessness she confronted. Me, the entire world will know by tomorrow. This is over, everything I've worked for. It's all falling apart. I stood there in stunned silence, not knowing what to say. I had never seen Freed so broken. So exposed, the man who had once seemed sound touchable was now unraveling before me. I never meant for any of this to happen. He continued, his voice shaking. I don't know what to do now. I thought I could control it, but I can't. You're the only person who's ever made me feel anything real, and now I've ruined it. It was in that moment that I realized how much I had invested in this relationship, how deeply I had fallen for him. Despite the complications, the lies, and the possessiveness, I had always known that our bond was fragile, but I never imagined it would shatter so quickly. Wes spent hours talking that night, thought. There was nothing either of us could say to fix what had been broken. Freed's wife had already set the wheels in motion. The scandal would be public, and there was no hiding from it. The next day, things escalated quickly. The media got wind of the affair, and soon the world knew what had been happening behind closed doors. My name was dragged through the mud, and I was forced to leave Freed's employment, the job I had worked so hard to secure, the life I had begun to build. Everything was gone in an instant. I never got a chance to say goodbye to him. One moment I was driving him around, feeling like I had found a place in his world, and the next I was just another casualty of his broken life. As I packed up my things and left the mansion for the last time, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had transpired, the love, the pain, the chaos. It all felt surreal, like a dream I couldn't wake up from. But as I walked away from the life I had known for the past few months, I also realized something. Despite everything, despite Thiele's, the heartbreak, and the loss, I had been changed. Freed had opened a door inside me that I didn't know existed. He'd made me feel seen, valued, and understood in a way I had never experienced before, and though all ended in heartbreak, I wasn't ashamed of what had happened. Months passed. I left the city and moved to Dubai, hoping to start fresh. The memories of Freed lingered in my mind, but I chose not to dwell on them. There was no use in looking back. I had grown, I had learned, and I had become someone new. I would carry the lessons of my time with him with me, grateful for the connection we shared, even if it was fleeting. Then one day I ran into him. It was in a quiet cafe far from the life we had known. Kareem looked different. He seemed older, more by the consequences of his actions, but his eyes, those same dark, intense eyes, still held that depth I had fallen for. He saw me first, and for a moment neither of us said anything. We just stood there, two people whose paths had crossed at one point in time, and now in this quiet moment had gone separate ways. Finally he spoke. I never thanked you for everything you did, for being there. I'll always remember you. His words were simple, but they carried so much weight. I don't regret it, he continued, even though it all fell. You showed me something I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to run into his arms and pick up where we had left off, but I knew that wasn't possible. We had both changed, and our time together had come to an end. I'm sorry, he added, his voice softer now, for everything I ruined it. I shook my head. We both did, but it's over now. We can't change what happened. Karim nodded, small, almost bitter smile playing on his lips. You're right, it's over there. Was a long silence between us, filled with unspoken emotions. Finally, he stood up, ready to leave. I'm grateful for what we had, I said. Even if it was a mistake, I won't forget it. I won't forget you. He smiled, but there was a sadness in his eyes that mirrored my own goodbye. He whispered as I walked away. I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. The story we shared, though, filled with pain and heartbreak, had shaped me into someone different, someone stronger, more self-aware. I had loved deeply, and though it had ended in loss, I was no longer the person I had been when it all started, and for that I would always be grateful. That I moved to Dubai, the city of endless horizons and opportunities. Trying to rebuild my life, the memories of Freed were still vivid, haunting me like a distant echo of a time that now felt like another lifetime. The city buzzed. Around me, tall buildings that scraped the sky, luxury cars that zipped by, and the vibrant energy of people all chasing their own dreams. I tried to lose myself in it all, hoping that in the vastness of this new world, I could leave behind the pieces of the past that still clung to me. But no matter how much it tried to distract myself, there were moments when Freed's presence felt so close, the way he had looked at me that first night in his bedroom, as if he saw something in me that no one else did. The quiet, almost intimate conversations we'd shared on the rooftop terrace, the warmth of his touch, and the raw vulnerability that I hadn't known how to handle at the time, despite everything. Despite the lies, the possessiveness, the betrayal, it was hard to forget. The man who had made me feel alive, even in the chaos, I found work in a small cafe, a place far from the wealth and glamour that Freed's world represented. It was simple, quiet, and it allowed me to focus on the one thing I knew I could control: myself. It threw myself into my job, building relationships with the regulars and creating a sense of belonging in a place that felt like a temporary stop on my journey. Slowly, I began to feel at ease in my new life, though a part of Mealways remained tethered to the past. Months passed, and I started to find a sense of purpose. I began working on projects in my spare time, small creative endeavors that helped me reconnect with who I was before everything with Freed had happened. But even as I moved forward, there was still a part of me that couldn't fully let go of the feelings I had for him. It wasn't just love, though. I'd loved him deeply. It was a sense of connection, a bond that had shaped me in ways I couldn't fully articulate then. One day I was sitting in the cafe, lost in thought. As I cleaned the counter, the door opened and a familiar voice called my name. I froze. It was Freed. I looked up, my heart racing, as I saw him standing there, looking almost exactly the way he had the last time we met, distant, older, yet with that same weight in his eyes. I stood there for a moment, not sure what to do. I had thought I was done with him, that I had moved on, but the sight of him standing in front of me brought all those old emotions flooding back. Can we talk? He asked softly, his gay, searching mind. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to turn away, to pretend that the past hadn't happened, but another part of me, the part that had never stopped caring about him, knew that this moment was inevitable. Our story, for better or for worse, wasn't over. I nodded slowly and gestured to a table by the window. We sat down, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. Freed stared out the window for a moment, his face reflecting the city's bustling energy, yet his mind seemed far away. I'm sorry. He began, his voice quiet but steady, for everything, for how things ended between us. I never wanted to hurt you, but I couldn't control anything. Not the situation, not my feelings, not us. I wanted to say something, anything but. The words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just listened, my eyes fixed on his face. I could see the weariness in his features, the heaviness that weighed on him. This man, who had seemed so unshakable when I first met him, was now a man who had lost everything. I tried to keep everything together, he continued, his voice laced with regret. But in the end, I lost. What mattered most, you? He paused, taking a deep breath, as if the next words were difficult to say. I was wrong. I should have let you go from the start. But I didn't, and now I'm left with nothing. I didn't know how to respond. The bitterness I had once felt had faded, replaced by a sorrow that mirrored his. I wasn't sure what I wanted from him now. Closure, perhaps, or maybe just a heart that he understood. The pain he had caused me. Do you ever regret it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Fried's eyes met mine, and I could see the honesty in his gaze every day. I nodded, slowly. I don't regret it, but I wish things had been different. I wish we hadn't let it go so far it destroyed both of us. In the end, there was a long pause, the weight of the words hanging in the air between us for a moment. I wasn't sure if I could forgive him or if I even wanted to, but what I did know was that I'd changed because of him, because of us. And no matter how much pain our time together had it had shaped me into someone who could finally understand my own desires and limits. I've moved on, I said, my voice steadier now. I had to let go of the past, to find something real. Fried's expression softened, but there was a sadness in his eyes. I know I can't undo what happened, but I want you to know that I'll always care about you. I'll always remember you. And I'm sorry for everything I put you through. The finality in his voice hung in the air, and I realized then that this was our goodbye. Our story was over. We were two people who had once been so entwined, but now we were strangers. The connection we had shared was beautiful, complicated, and ultimately destructive. But I had come to terms with it. I had to. I'll remember you too, I said quietly, my heart heavy but at peace. But it's time for both of us to move on with that. Wes stood up, exchanging one last, lingering glance. No more words were needed. We had said everything that mattered. As I watched him walk out of the cafe and disappear into the bustling streets of Dubai, I felt a weight lift off my chest. The chapter we had shared was over, and though it had been filled with pain and confusion, it had also been filled with something beautiful. I had loved, I had lost, and I had learned, and now I was ready for whatever came next for the first time in a long time. I felt like I had some measure of stability. At first, I was intimidated by Fried's wealth and power. The mansion, the cars, the luxury. It was all so foreign to me, but as I spent more time with him, I began to see another side of him. Kareem was calm, almost serene, despite the chaos that seemed to surround him. There was no arrogance in his demeanor, no sense of superiority. He was gracious, kind even, and surprisingly lonely. I noticed how he rarely paid attention to the women who threw themselves at him, and I found that curious. In a world where status and wealth seemed to attract attention, his indifference was almost out of place. One evening after dropping Fried off at his mansion, I received an unexpected invitation. Come inside, he said, his voice steady but inviting. I hesitated. What did he want? But something about the way he spoke, something in his tone, made me feel like it wasn't just